find no quarter in Pakistan or in any other country. America has been at war in Afghanistan for 15 years. Weary as some Americans may be of this long conflict, it's imperative that we see our mission through to success. We have seen what happens when we fail to be vigilant. The threats we face are real and the stakes are high, not just for the lives of the Afghan people and the stability of the region, but for America's national security. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to join you in welcoming General Nicholson. Thank you, General, for your service and for your presence here today. As General Nicholson often points out, Afghanistan and the Pakistan area is home to the highest concentration of designated terrorist organizations in the world. And given this context, it is important that the United States, in conjunction with NATO and our other allies, continue our commitment to the security and stability of Afghanistan. Furthermore, Pakistani support for extremist groups operating in Afghanistan, whether it is passive or deliberate, must end if we and Afghanistan are to achieve necessary levels of security. Decisions made last year by President Obama to maintain approximately 8,400 troops in Afghanistan into 2017 and to provide robust support to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces laid the foundation for sustainable U.S. and international presence in Afghanistan. The decisions also sent an important message to Afghans, the Taliban, and others in the region, including Pakistan, regarding the commitment of the United States to continued progress in Afghanistan. Assuming the continued invitation of the Afghan government and the support of its people, I believe we should adopt a conditions-based approach to our presence in Afghanistan that provides flexibility in the number of military personnel deployed there in support of our longer-term strategy. January 2017 marked the second year in which the Afghan security forces were the chief guarantors of security in Afghanistan. These forces continue to demonstrate determination and operational cohesion, even as they have been confronted by an array of challenges, including intensified urban combat, increased casualties, and a nearly continuous conflict that has hindered their ability to reset and refit. This sustained operational tempo is also a challenge to the ongoing coalition training efforts and contributed to the difficulties of recruiting and retraining troops. In addition, sustained combat operations have taken a particular toll on the Afghan Special Operations Forces, the most capable of the Afghan security forces, who have been relied upon heavily to retake territory from the Taliban. An over-reliance on their special capabilities is resulting in an unsustainable operational tempo and a high level of casualties. General Nicholson, I look forward to your assessment of the performance of the Afghan forces over the past year and plans for sustaining the force and addressing remaining capability shortfalls. Afghanistan is and must remain a key pillar of our long-term global counterterrorism strategy. We continue to observe more aggressive Taliban operations capable of pressuring the Afghan security forces simultaneously on multiple fronts. This is compounded by elements of the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant in the Khorasan province, or ISILK, who remain in Afghanistan, despite suffering some significant battlefield losses over the past year. Recently, the Pakistani military has increased operations on their side of the border. This resulted in an increased number of fighters moving into Afghanistan, which is ironic but the actual outcome of their operations. In addition, elements of al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other associated groups continue to enjoy safe haven along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. General, it would be important to hear your views on the status of our counter-terror fight and the resources you require to continue this mission. The National Unity Government, led by President Ghani and Chief Executive Officer Abdullah, has demonstrated the will to work through a complex set of issues with the goal of addressing much-needed political and governmental reforms. I hope they will continue to do so, particularly with respect to anti-corruption, economic development, and other governance initiatives which will be central to long-term success. General, I look forward to your assessment of the current political context in which our operations are occurring and the progress made by U.S. government efforts to help the Afghan civil forces build and reform Afghan institutions, which are critical to our long-term security. Once again, General, thank you for your service to the country, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. Welcome, General. I think you need to punch the There you go.
Thank you, sir. Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, thank you for the honor of appearing before you today. I appreciate this opportunity to update you on our mission in Afghanistan. First, I want to thank the committee for your leadership and your dedication to the men and women of United States Forces Afghanistan and the NATO Resolute Support Mission. We deeply appreciate your visits to Afghanistan, and your steadfast support protects our homeland. Your commitment is also in building an enduring partner in the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces, or ANDSF. They know that we support them, and it gives them the confidence they need to do their job. I would like to start by honoring the men and women who have served in Afghanistan and who are currently deployed there. Our U.S. service members, our NATO allies, and by the way, the NATO allies who invoked Article 5 after 9/11 and have been by our side ever since in Afghanistan, and our NATO partners who have joined the mission in Afghanistan. I particularly want to highlight the role of the NATO framework nations, Italy, Germany, and Turkey, who provided leadership, manning, and funding, and our non-NATO partners, such as Georgia, who is the largest non-NATO troop contributing nation. We should also remember that as we sit here today, 5 Americans and 2 citizens from our coalition partners are being held hostage at unknown locations in the AfPak region by members of the Taliban-aligned Haqqani network. I would also like to highlight the case of Dr. Shakil Afridi, who's been unjustly imprisoned. I want to acknowledge the brave men and women of the Afghan security forces and the people of Afghanistan who are fighting for a secure and stable country. The success of our mission depends on their courage, determination, and sacrifice. We especially remember those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our country and Afghanistan. Their strength and the strength of their families inspires us to do our jobs, and our pledge is that we will deliver on their sacrifice. Our main objective in Afghanistan is to prevent our country from being used prevent this country from being used as a safe haven for terrorists to attack the United States and our allies. We perform 2 complementary missions: the U.S. counterterrorism mission, Operation Freedom Sentinel, and the NATO Train, Advise, and Assist mission, Operation Resolute Support. Of the 98 U.S. designated terrorist groups globally, 20 operate in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region, along with 3 violent extremist organizations. This is the highest concentration of terrorist groups anywhere in the world, which underscores the importance of our counterterrorism platform in the Central Asia, South Asia region, which protects our homeland. We remain very focused on the defeat of al-Qaeda and its associates, as well as the defeat of Islamic State Khorasan province, which is the ISIL affiliate in Afghanistan. Last year, the Afghan forces developed and implemented a detailed campaign plan to take the fight to the enemy. It was a hard fight, but the Afghan forces prevailed. They prevented the Taliban from accomplishing any of their strategic objectives, and the authorities and air power, which I was granted in June, were absolutely critical to the success of the fight last year. The Afghan Special Operations Forces also played a crucial role. As a result of our training, equipping, and partnering, the 17,000-strong Afghan Special Forces are the best in the region. They now operate independently on roughly 80% of their missions. The Afghan Air Force is also rapidly gaining capability. Their first ground attack aircraft entered the fight in April, and they're now integrating intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets into their new targeting process, so they're making great progress. Congressional approval of the funding for the Afghan Air Force is key to improving the offensive capability of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. There is an urgency to this request in that in order to get these aircraft and air crews into the fight as soon as possible. I do remain concerned about the influence of certain external actors, particularly Pakistan, Russia, and Iran, who continue to legitimize and support the Taliban and undermine the Afghan government's efforts to create a stable Afghanistan. Our complex relationship with Pakistan is best assessed through a holistic review. Many nations are committed to the success of Afghanistan. At the Warsaw Summit last July, NATO reaffirmed its commitment to sustain the ANDSF for 4 more years through 2020. At the Brussels conference in October, 75 countries and organizations confirmed their intention to provide $15.2 billion to Afghans' development needs, and this plays a very positive role going into the future. India has dedicated another $1 billion on top of the $2 billion that they have already given to Afghan development needs, and we appreciate their support. These expressions of international commitment reflect the importance which the world places on stability in Afghanistan and and confidence in the Afghan people and Afghan government. The Afghan security forces fought bravely in 2016. They will do the same this year and in the years ahead. The Afghan people have confidence in their security services, and they do not want the Taliban to return. They know all too well what that means. We have an exceptional partnership with President Ghani, Chief Executive Abdullah, the security forces, and the people of Afghanistan. President Ghani is making bold reforms and implementing anti-corruption measures to professionalize and improve the Afghan security forces. The government of Afghanistan is committed to achieving peace through reconciliation. However, so long as external support and safe haven persist, the path to reconciliation will be extremely difficult. Afghanistan wants peace, and we hope that their neighbors realize that their best interests are also served by a peaceful and prosperous Afghanistan. Mr. Chairman, committee members, it's a privilege to appear before you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, General. In your overall commander's assessment, are we winning or losing?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we're in a stalemate.
Thank you. And, of course, our Afghan partners have been sustaining very significant losses, and I'm not sure that's sustainable, the level of losses that the ANA is experiencing.
And, Mr. Chairman, we're very concerned about the level of losses. The recurrent recruitment replaces the level of losses that they're experiencing. However, it does not allow them to get to their full authorized strength, which they are below.
According to the IG, the Taliban controls 15% more territory than they did in 2015. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do.
As you know, and the committee knows, 8,400 U.S. troops and 5,000 coalition troops. That's 13,300. And I'm fully aware, General, I know members are, that numbers are just one parameter. It's what they do, how they're equipped, and all that. But it is an important parameter. How many more do you need to get this stalemate reversed?
Mr. Chairman, I have adequate resourcing in my counterterrorism mission. In my train, advise, and assist mission, however, we have a shortfall of a few thousand. And this is in the NATO train, advise, assist mission. So this can come from the U.S. and its allies.
It's of concern, shouldn't it be, to all of us that you now have Russia, Iran, and Al-Qaeda now playing significant roles, some one more than the other, but that wasn't the case a couple of years ago, was it?
Mr. Chairman, I agree. There have been an increase in external actors interfering in the Afghan attainment of peace and stability.
And the Russian involvement?
The Russian involvement this year has become more difficult. First, they have begun to publicly legitimize the Taliban. This narrative that they promote is that the Taliban are fighting Islamic State and the Afghan government is not fighting Islamic State, and that therefore there could be a spillover of this group into the region. This is a false narrative. The Afghan government, along with the U.S. counterterrorism forces, are successfully fighting against Islamic State in Afghanistan. In this year alone, we have reduced their fighters by half, their territory by 2/3. We've killed their leader, in fact, their top 12 leaders, and continue to disrupt their operations.
And what's your view of what we need to do concerning the safe haven issue in Pakistan?
Sir, it's very difficult to succeed on the battlefield when your enemy enjoys external support and safe haven. I think we need to continue to work closely with Pakistan.
And they did some good work in North Waziristan, right?
They did, sir, and we have great respect for the operation they conducted in Waziristan. It was a very large and significant operation, and they suffered heavy casualties.
But the problem is the Haqqani network, especially in places like Quetta?
Sir, that's correct. We still have enemy sanctuary in areas like Quetta, as you mentioned, with the Taliban leadership, and other cities within the tribal areas for the Haqqani leadership.
And recently, have your rules of engagement been to the point where you have a greater ability to combat the enemy?
So the rules of engagement I gained in June were instrumental to our success this year. They clearly helped us throughout the year. These rules of engagement or authorities involve the use of U.S. combat enablers, most notably air power, in support of Afghan security forces and their campaign.
As you pointed out in your opening statement, the Afghans want to fight for themselves,
Absolutely.
right? They don't want us to go in and fight for them.
Right.
And so, but if they're going to be effective, they need the kind of assistance and capability, including, you might mention, air capability that we're now training them for. For example, I'm proud that many of them are training in F-16s in Tucson, Arizona. But isn't their air capability an important component of their capability of assuming the responsibilities from us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. If I may elaborate on that just a little bit. Offensive capability is what will break the stalemate in Afghanistan. The key offensive capabilities in the Afghan security forces are their special forces and their air force. This investment, which we are requesting in the Afghan Air Force, will help them, as you mentioned, to take over responsibility for their own close air support. And even more importantly, this then will lead to an offensive capability that allows them to overmatch the Taliban or any other group on the battlefield anywhere around the country.
And it might be nice if they could come to the United States to train.
Yes, sir, and they look forward to this.
Which they are not allowed to do at the moment. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General, again for your service. And please relay our thanks and gratitude to the men and women that you lead.
I will, Senator.
Not only U.S. forces, but NATO forces.
Thank you, sir.
You have stated that your counterterrorism platform, both personnel and equipment, is more than adequate for the task. Is that your view?
That's correct, Senator. We have adequate resources. And I would add, when we need to do additional operations, we can surge assets into the country, and this is why it's adequate. General Votel and General Thomas from Central Command and Special Operations Command have the ability to move assets in coordination with the department, and so this has proven to be a successful tactic.
Very good. So the need for more manpower is on the train, advise, and assist area.
Yes, sir.
At this juncture, you are operating at the corps level?
That's correct, Senator.
Some exceptions? Are there any exceptions?
Senator, in the last summer, since we gained the new authorities in June, we began developing what we called expeditionary advising packages, which we would push down below the corps level. Now, this was something we put together based on the authorities and approved quite successful last year. But we would like to be able to advise below the corps level. This is something that NATO has agreed to in our guidance. It's strictly a question of manning at this point.
So that you would be able to essentially have more of these teams below the corps level?
Yes, sir.
At battalion level, but not down at the individual company platoon level, certainly.
Sir, it would most likely be at the brigade level, but we think that would be adequate for what we need to do.
And our NATO allies are prepared to help out, too, in terms of bulking up these forces?
Sir, I'd use as an example our German allies developed an expeditionary advising package that they placed in Kunduz last year. This was a great help. Our Italian allies in the West are looking at something similar. But we've been able to integrate U.S. expeditionary advising packages around the country as required in a seamless manner.
Both the chairman, myself, and you in your opening statements have commented on the criticality of dealing with Pakistan, and it is a very complicated situation. As you've pointed out, they have conducted very serious and very credible operations. They've sustained casualties, but on the other hand, they seem at times, particularly ISI, their intelligence service, to be aiding and assisting Haqqani Network and others. You have had some dealings with the new Chief of Staff of the Army. I don't know if you have any dealings with the new head of ISI, but does it make sense to focus our persuasive efforts on not the overall country, but on specific sub-elements within Pakistan?
Sir, I have great respect for the Pakistan military and its leaders. I'm developing I believe, a positive and constructive relationship with General Bajwa and his team. And again, we have great respect for the operations they've conducted in the Fatah. As both you and the chairman have mentioned, the Pakistan people have also suffered from the scourge of terrorism. And I quite sincerely want to eliminate those terrorists that are attacking their society. If I may, I'd like to highlight one example. This year, U.S. counterterrorism efforts killed someone named Omar Khalifa. Omar Khalifa was the head of the Tareki Ghidar group who perpetuated the horrendous attack on the Peshawar Army School. This was the attack which killed over 130 children in Peshawar, and was the 2-year commemoration occurred in December. So this is an example of how the United States is working with Pakistan against our common enemies. We also, in a raid this year in eastern Afghanistan, liberated the son of the former Pakistani Prime Minister. His name was Haider Gilani, and returned him to his family in Pakistan. So I highlight these as examples of how the U.S. is working with Pakistan against common enemies. But we need to improve in the areas that you mentioned. We need to improve the pressure applied on the Haqqanis and the Taliban on the Pakistan side of the border.
Again, General, thank you for your service, and continue to look forward to your continued service. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Reinhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mentioned 3 things when you were generous enough to come to the office, and we have a nice visit. And I want to just 2 of the things have been really responded to, and so I won't bring them up. One was, of course, the fact that the Afghan Security Force district that they controlled has gone down to 57% from the 72%, which you did respond to in the chairman's questions. The second thing, which you pretty much answered, is the talking about the troop levels. Except, as it is right now, we have about 8,500 of our guys over there.
Yes, sir.
And about 12,500 total.
Yes, sir.
And when you said a minute ago that the shortfall is a few thousand, is that we need to correct in order to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish right now? When you say a few thousand, would that be referring to ours or to the total allies and the total figure?
Sir, this is in the area of the Train, Advise, Assist mission, which is a NATO mission. So these contributions could come from our allies as well as the United States. We have identified the requirement and the desire to advise below the core level. So these additional forces would enable us to thicken our advisory effort across the Afghan ministries and do more advising below the core level. So this is an area that I am currently in discussion with my chain of command, with General Votel, General Scaparrotti, Chairman Dunford, Secretary Mattis. And I know that in the coming weeks, when Secretary Mattis has a chance to attend the defense ministerials next week and consult with allies and visit the theater, then we're going to be able to discuss this in greater detail.
Okay, that clarification is good. I think it's necessary because the media will be covering this. We want to make sure they know what we're talking about here.
Thank you, sir.
Now, the main thing I wanted to cover, and it's one that is, we have these meetings. We have private meetings with you and all the great people that we're depending on, and I'm very proud of all of you and what is going on. We have that opportunity. You also have the opportunity to consult with us because we have a little closer contact with the people out there who are paying for all this stuff.
Yes, sir.
And one of the problems that we have is even in my state of Oklahoma, I'll go back and they'll talk about, all right, we've been there 15 years now, we've been doing this.
Yes, sir.
Why is it worth all of that? The strongest thing that I can say is something I honestly believe in my heart, and that is if we don't do it over there, it's going to be done in the homeland. You addressed this in your written statement. When you said your predecessor, General Campbell, said if we don't stay engaged here to build the Afghans' capacity to fight this threat, keep the sanctuary down, it's coming back to our homeland. Then you re-emphasized that in your opening statement. Now, what I'd like to do is, I think it's worth getting into the record here as to how this might affect something on our homeland. We understand this. We've gotten a lot of things in confidential briefings, but I think it's very important for the country to know that. Any comments you can make on any specifics? I know that when you had the death of, that they had actually had plans for an attack on the mainland. Can you comment on that?
Yes, Senator, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to articulate this. We believe, as we said, that our operations in Afghanistan directly protect the homeland. The individual you're referring to is named Farouk al-Qatari.
Yes,
yes, sir. We killed him on October the 23rd in eastern Afghanistan in a remote area of Kunar province. Farouk al-Qatari was the external operations director for al-Qaeda. He was involved in plotting against the U.S. homeland. So this is one example, without getting into classified details, of a specific terrorist operating in Afghanistan who was involved in plotting against the U.S. homeland. More importantly, his organization, al-Qaeda, and its affiliates have been severely attrited and degraded, as you know, and our objective is to destroy them in Afghanistan. We will continue to keep pressure, but in order to do that, we need to maintain the counterterrorism platform that we have in Afghanistan in an enduring manner. So this is how it directly relates to our national security at home. I would also add, Senator, if I may, that from a height of our engagement in Afghanistan over the past 15 years, we were over 100,000 troops. We are now down to about 10% of that. So as we look at this commitment over time, that surge that we did into Afghanistan will enable us to build the Afghan security forces, and as the chairman mentioned, now it is they who are doing most of the fighting. From the height of our assistance to the Afghan security forces was 10 to 12 billion in those years that we were building. We're now down to about 3.5 billion for the Afghan security forces fund with additional funds to support our troops. So there has been a reduction in the overall cost of this mission.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. My time has expired, but it's the homeland connection that we need to be armed with. You've done a very good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Nicholson. Thank you for taking command of our mission in Afghanistan, and thank you for meeting with me earlier this week. I appreciate the generosity of your time. We officially ended our combat mission in Afghanistan at the end of 2014, but obviously we still maintain a substantial presence there. And one of our primary objectives in Afghanistan is to help build and sustain the capacity of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces to secure their own country, as you've discussed. And that includes paying salaries for Afghan personnel. Now, I understand why this kind of support is powerfully important when you're trying to build a local force, but in a report issued last month identifying the greatest threats to the success of our mission, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction repeated the nagging problem of salaries being paid to non-existent or so-called ghost soldiers and ghost police officers. To succeed, I understand that the Afghan forces must be trained and capable, but above all, they must be fully manned. There must actually be people there. And although they're authorized at 352,000, reports have estimated that there are still tens of thousands of those ghost personnel who are getting salaries and included in those numbers. So that means the strength of the Afghan forces must be substantially less. It's dangerous for our troops, obviously, damaging to the missions. It's also just plain old corruption, and the American taxpayers are footing the bill. General, I know that you recently identified corruption as a serious problem that you wanted to tackle, one of the biggest challenges facing the Afghan security forces. And so I wondered, could you just speak to the question of how we're helping the Afghan Ministries of Defense and Interior develop a fully operational system to help eliminate this problem?
Thank you, Senator, for highlighting this issue. And it is a critical issue. In fact, as we looked at the high casualty rates last year, the principal causes that we identified were, number one, failures in leadership on the battlefield. The second was corruption, as you've highlighted. So the corruption primarily has occurred in the pay system and the personnel system, as you've highlighted, ma'am, and also in the supply system. The third factor of high casualties was tactics, and primarily the reduction of the checkpoints out there, the isolated checkpoints that become more vulnerable to attack. So back to the point of corruption, how to improve this. And this is where in my opening statement I commented on President Ghani's courage in going after this. So we have done a number of things. On the specific issue of ghost soldiers, you're correct. We believe there are some tens of thousands fewer soldiers in the field than have been reported. And we work closely with the CGAR on this going forward and with the government of Afghanistan. So specifically this year, in response to this problem, we have issued a letter to the Afghan government advising them that we are withholding the funding for those soldiers who we cannot biometrically account for. So the biometric enrollment of soldiers creates an identity in the system that is hard to fake, basically. Whereas previously, we paid based upon the number that they stated that they had. So the biometric enrollment is ongoing, and we look to have that complete in the next 4 to 5 months. And but then we will give them the money for those soldiers who are actually biometrically enrolled. We've additionally asked for capabilities to better follow our money through the Afghan ministries, to follow the money, ensure it's not being inappropriately diverted, so we can be good stewards of our taxpayer resources.
Good. Thank you very much, General. You know, we've been in Afghanistan for 15 years. We've spent $117 billion in American taxpayer funds. And according to the Special Inspector General, we're spending $13 million every day to be in Afghanistan. $13 million. More than 2,000 American service members have made the ultimate sacrifice there. More than 8,400 American service members are there today, along with thousands of diplomatic personnel and contractors. Our military and it cannot and should not be in Afghanistan forever. Our end goal must be to help Afghanistan build a self-sustaining force that's capable of securing the country so our U.S. troops can come home. And I appreciate your work in this direction. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for your service, and thank you for the service of those that you command. It is appreciated by everyone in this country. When you and I had our conversation in my office, we talked about possible additional capabilities that you would need. And we specifically kind of focused in on the contractors that are in Afghanistan now. Could you talk about the consequences of the so-called boots on the ground limitation that we're looking at, particularly with respect to the reliance that we have on contractors?
Thank you, Senator, for raising that issue. And it has two implications. Of course, it has an implication for us on the ground in Afghanistan, but also for overall readiness of our armed services, which I know is of a great concern to this committee. So specifically, as the force manning levels have taken effect, what we have done in some cases is substitute contractors for soldiers in order to meet the force manning levels. I'll give you an example of that in the case of our aviation brigade. So we have the Combat Aviation Brigade of the 1st Infantry Division from Fort Riley, Kansas, is in Afghanistan. They deployed with their helicopters and their pilots and their staffs, but because of our troop limitations, we left their mechanics back in Fort Riley and substituted contract mechanics. And this was in order to optimize the amount of actual uniformed soldiers we're allowed. This contract for maintenance runs into the tens of millions of dollars, and then the soldiers who are trained to be mechanics are sitting back at Fort Riley not having the opportunity to do their job. So this has a direct impact on Army readiness, and it also costs us more money. So as we have begun these discussions with the administration and with Secretary Mattis, this is one of the issues that we have put on the table, is how to optimize readiness and our performance in the battlefield by managing by objective and not by force manning level. Currently, with contractors, we have roughly a 2-to-1 ratio of contractors to soldiers, and if we look at the deploying whole units instead of portions of units, then this would enable us to reduce our contractor load somewhat, and it would be better for Army and service readiness.
I would imagine you're going to raise those concerns about and ask for more flexibility then from these limitations when you are able to have those discussions?
Yes, Senator.
You spoke about the increasing Russian involvement in Afghanistan and that growing relationship that they're having with the Taliban. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more for us,
Yes,
please?
ma'am. So in addition to the public legitimizing of the Taliban, which is surprising given the Taliban have evolved over the years into a narco-insurgency and one that engages in extensive criminal activity, narcotics, kidnapping, illegal mining, and other forms of criminal activity to fund their operations. Russia has legitimized them with this false narrative of fighting ISIL-K. They also have initiated a series of meetings in Moscow to which the Afghans have not been invited for the first several meetings, in which to discuss the future of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is trying to work with all of its neighbors and all the stakeholders. They've reached out to the Russians about this, and we believe that a peace and reconciliation process in Afghanistan should be Afghan-led. And this has been the position of the United States government, and these are we believe this will be the most lasting, enduring, effective peace arrangement. So ultimately, where we're trying to go and help the Afghans go is to get to a point where they reconcile with the belligerents, end this long war that they've experienced, and be able to move forward with a peaceful and prosperous country.
Okay. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr.
Senator.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and General. Wonderful to have you here, and appreciate the time that we had yesterday in my office as well, talking about a number of these issues. During this hearing, a number of folks have referenced the Inspector General's report about what's been happening in Afghanistan, and I want to just highlight some of those findings that I find particularly striking and then ask a question. But as others have mentioned, since 2001, 2,247 U.S. military personnel have died, 20,000 have been wounded. Adjusted for inflation, the U.S. has spent more on Afghanistan's reconstruction than it did on the Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe after World War II. Reconstructing Afghanistan has now become the largest expenditure to rebuild a single country in our nation's history. The Afghan security forces are not capable of providing security for the whole country. The Afghan government cannot sustain many of the investments that the U.S. taxpayers have made in the country. And despite a U.S. investment of $8.5 billion in counter-narcotics, Afghan opium production is now at an all-time high. Despite $70 billion in U.S. investment in Afghan security forces, only 63% of the country is under government control. Corruption continues to erode legitimacy, limiting effectiveness, bolstering support for the opposing insurgency. And after 15 years, Afghanistan still cannot support itself financially or functionally, and long-term financial assistance will be required if the country is to survive. Not a good record after 15 years of involvement in Afghanistan, and after what I've heard today and what we talked about yesterday, it's becoming even more complicated with the Russian involvement, Chinese involvement in natural resources, and the list goes on. If you could just say and what I've heard is a lot of what I've heard over the last 15 years of what the United States will be doing in Afghanistan. What are we going to do that's different, that has not been done in 15 years, given this I think, pretty damaging report about what's happened over the last 15 years.
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the reviewing this and the chance to talk about President Ghani's plan for the way ahead. So one of the, and I acknowledge and again express our appreciation for the great support from this body to sustain this effort. Our number one objective has been to protect the homeland, and we have not had another attack on the homeland from Afghanistan in the 15 years that we have been there. So I'd say that's point number one. As I mentioned before, so I acknowledge fully the significant sunk cost that we have made in Afghanistan. I would mention that we now are at about 10% of what we once were in terms of troop commitment, and have reduced those other expenditures significantly. Yes, the problems persist, and I don't want to in any way minimize those. What we have with President Ghani is a partner who is willing to boldly go after these problems, and this is significant. And I offered the example of the ghost soldiers. This was something that he was willing to do that previously we had not been able to do. I also want to share the plans we are working with the Afghan government, which President Ghani calls the ANDSF roadmap, 4-year roadmap. After the Warsaw Summit this summer in July of 16, when the Allies granted 4 more years of commitment to Afghanistan, President Ghani sat down with his team and us to say, how are we going to achieve success in the next 4 years? We're working on that plan now. This plan involves expanding the amount of control that the government has over the population. I should point out that this investment that we have made has resulted in a Afghan population who universally, well, almost universally, 87% reject the Taliban. They do not want to return to the Taliban. 3/4 of the population have great confidence in their security forces. So this is a population and a government who want to work with us and need our support. Geostrategically, it's a critically important region of the world. This is a tough neighborhood. Iran, Pakistan, China, Central Asia. Once removed, you have other conflict zones. We have a partner in Afghanistan, a moderate Islamic republic that wants to partner with us against terrorism. We have a population who reject terrorism, and we have a ability to have a counterterrorism platform in a critically important part of the world. So success going forward, we believe, means helping the Afghans to achieve this greater population control. That then will enable us to have the enduring counterterrorism platform to help to continue to protect our homeland and those of our allies. We also see if we can get to a place of reconciliation, that we then bring a degree of stability to this critical region that will benefit the entire neighborhood, to include India, China, everyone. So in my initial conversations with my new chain of command, we have touched upon all of these areas. So your concerns and the concerns of this committee are at the top of the list as we discuss this going forward on how we can achieve success in Afghanistan going forward to protect our national interests along the lines I just outlined.